Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me again this morning on Next on the Tee. I'm your host, Chris Mascaro, and today I have both the honor and the privilege of speaking with one of the greatest broadcasters of all time, Mr. Ben Wright. I've had the honor of talking with guys, on this show, legends in this sport like Mr. Gary Player and Mr. Billy Casper, guys who are very powerful in the game of golf like Steve Mona and members of the media who are going to become legends, Mr. Peter Kessler and Mr. Matt Adams. But when Mr. Wright answered the phone when I called and agreed to join me this morning, the sense of anticipation for this conversation has been like a kid looking forward to Christmas morning. I tell you what, I am so excited and so honored to have him as part of the show today. Mr. Wright's knowledge, insights, and calls are woven into the history of the game of golf. He was so much a part of what made the Masters special for over 20 years. The game of golf lost a voice that elevated the sport and the broadcasting medium, quite frankly, to a higher level when he was forced to walk away nearly 20 years ago. We'll talk about his absolutely fascinating life, his time at CBS, and, of course, the Masters when he joins me here in just a moment. But before we get started, I want to kick off the show like we do every single week here by saluting the brave men and women serving in our military. We want to thank you for your daily sacrifices and all you do to keep the rest of us safe. We also want to thank those of you who serve or have served in every branch of the military and public service. We truly appreciate what you do to preserve our freedoms and our liberties. Quite frankly, it's through your strength and efforts that our way of life is even possible. Our sincere thanks as well to Sean Cruz and all the wonderful folks at the Armed Forces Radio Network. It's an honor for us to be a part of your network. You can find our show by going to armedforcesradionetwork.org. We also want to thank everyone listening in on iHeartRadio, as well as great radio sites across the internet like Spreaker.com, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, Player.fm, and Blog Talk Radio. I also want to give a special shout-out to our good friends Mike Kovacs, Ben Kerr, Mark Medeski, and the rest of the great staff over at lastwordonsports.com. Check those guys out online and on Twitter. I'm telling you, folks, their site is absolutely fantastic and contains great content across every sport. Their staff of writers are wonderful. You're going to love going to their site every single day for your sports news. If you haven't been there yet, then you need to go check it out and then bookmark it. lastwordonsports.com. Plus, if someone's dragging you to the mall, hey, the holiday seasons are coming up. You're going to be spending time in the mall. If you're at the grocery store, you're just tired of the same old on your commute, download the Player.fm or the Stitcher app on your smartphone and take us with you everywhere you go. And I also want to give a shout-out to our great folks over at Kyvan Foods. They are the sponsor of this show. Former Bengals and Falcons tight end Reggie Kelly has created a wonderful array of products, his salsas, sauces, and spices. They're all natural, and they're going to liven up every meal and every recipe that you have. So wow your friends at your next house party, your upcoming holiday parties, or your next tailgate party by adding Kyvan products to everything on your menu. You can find them online by going to Kyvan82.com. That's Kyvan, K-Y-V-A-N, the number 82.com. All right, now joining me on the Kyvan Foods guest line is Mr. Ben Wright. Mr. Wright, as you know, is one of the great broadcasters in the history of radio and television. Let me give you some background that you may not know. He was educated at the Felsted School in Essex, England, and at London University. He served as a Russian interpreter in the British Army. In 1954, he became a sports writer and then golf correspondent with the Daily Dispatch in Manchester and the Daily Mirror in London before becoming a freelance writer and broadcaster in 1961. He wrote weekly columns for The Observer and Sunday Times national newspapers and contributed regularly to Time magazine and Sports Illustrated. He did broadcasts for the BBC Radio and Television and ITV, a British commercial network. He was one of the founders and associate editors of Golf World in the UK and joined the Financial Times as his first ever golf correspondent in 1966 and wrote weekly columns there until 1989. In addition to serving as an announcer for CBS TV Sports starting in 1972, Mr. Wright broadcast golf for the BBC, ITV, Australian TV, and TV in New Zealand. From 1993 to 96, he hosted the World Feed for the Sun City $1 Million Challenge and broadcast the World Cup of Golf from Cape Town, South Africa in 1966. And he's forever going to live in my heart and in my mind for the wonderful work he did at CBS Broadcasting, particularly at the Masters. As you all know, I'm a big fan of Jack Nicklaus, and Mr. Wright's call during CBS's coverage of the back nine in 1986 is part of the magic that made that afternoon so wonderful and so memorable for so many of us. And I am so honored to have him next on the tee with me this morning. Mr. Wright, thank you so much for joining me.
Chris, I love joining you. I'm exhausted by your introduction. I'm not worth that much, for goodness me, but I have had a very wonderful life. I mean, a man who is blessed with traveling the world in the front cabin at other people's expense and then gets paid a king's ransom for so doing is a truly lucky man, particularly as I've had a love affair with the game of golf since I was a 10-year-old, and my paternal grandfather presented me on my 10th birthday with a cut-down hickory-shafted mashie, which I proceeded to break on numerous occasions and had it reshafted. But that club gave me an insight into the game that I probably would never have had, and I bless my paternal grandfather for doing that. We'd just gone through the Coventry Blitz together, so it was pretty nice to go down to his local golf club in Coventry Hersal, and thrash around with my little club, as a little boy.
No doubt. Mr. Wright, I also read that you loved golf growing up, as you mentioned, from 10 years old, but you also loved rugby and racing, maybe a little bit more up until a time when you had a bad racing accident one day in Essex. Is that the kind of the line that drew? You know what? Now it's time to switch everything over to all golf. Well,
I had a terrible crash at the Boreham racetrack, which is now the Ford test track in Essex, England. And my mum fainted when she saw me unconscious in the hospital. And she said, when I awakened, she said, "No more of that, young man, or I'll disown you." So it was a short-lived and undistinguished career as a race driver, I'm afraid to say.
As I mentioned in the intro, I'm absolutely fascinated by your background. You were a Russian interpreter for the British Army. How did that come about?
Well, they called me up. In those days, I'm talking about 1951, you were obliged, every male was obliged to do 2 years national service, as they called it. And they called me up into the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. And Chris, I can tell you, I know nothing mechanical, and least of all electrical. I confuse a neighborhood, at will almost. So I applied at the first possible opportunity for a transfer to be sent on a Russian language course, because we were at the height of the First Gulf War at that time. And really, I mean, we were on the verge of the Third World War. There was no question about it. So I was bullied through 15 months of intensive Russian language instruction, so much so that I got a first-class honors degree after 15 months, because I was working morning, noon, and night. And if you went on a 36-hour pass at the weekend, you had homework to show to your instructor first thing Monday morning. It was really, really, really hard work. And after the first 3 months, you were not allowed to speak English in the classroom. And if you ever fell below 40% in the monthly test, you were sent back to your original unit. And, of course, I would do anything to have avoided that. So I worked like a dog. And I ended up interrogating deserters in Berlin. I could have been posted to Korea and the Korean War, and luckily enough, I'd had childhood asthma, so I was graded third class, as it were, as a human being. And so therefore I was not allowed to be sent to the hostilities in Korea, from which I'm profoundly grateful, obviously.
Right.
As it was, things were pretty rough in Berlin. We hardly got out, and when we did, we were cautioned to be extraordinarily careful. And it was not what you'd call the happiest of times, but I did my share, and I got a little medal for it. So there we are.
There you go. Now, Mr. Wright, you've spoken with and covered just about every great golfer in the modern era. Plus, you had the opportunity to get to know Bobby Jones. When we were talking leading up to the show this week, one of the many treasures that you have is a letter from Mr. Jones. Do you mind talking about the relationship you had with him?
Oh, yes. He was a regular reader of the Financial Times newspaper, the pink paper, published in London, and I was their first ever golf writer, and he corresponded with me as a result, because he wasn't always in agreement with what I was writing. And actually, when I was summoned to what was virtually his deathbed at the Masters of 1971, before I'd started with CBS, I was working for the FT, as they called it, and the BBC at Augusta, and I was summoned to Mr. Jones's bedside, and I was shown into this darkened room, and by then Mr. Jones had virtually withered away to nothing, and he was in the darkened room, and the nurse came in and turned him over every 20 minutes, but his mind was as sharp as it ever was, and my goodness, he was an incredibly clever man. I mean, he held 3 degrees in various subjects, and was one of the most erudite people I ever had the privilege of meeting. And yeah, as I came into the darkened room, and I'd come out of the hot Augusta sunlight, I had difficulty in finding out where Mr. Jones was lying, and suddenly this loud voice said, "You would slap a 2-stroke penalty on a professional golfer for slow play?" And I said, yes, sir, I would. I said, Mr. Jones, you're against slow play just as I am, and we both know it's a cancer that is threatening the livelihood of golf, and something's got to be done about it. And he said, well, you can't slap 2 strokes on a man. You might deprive him of a large part of his livelihood. And I said, well, something's got to be done. And we talked on a bit about it, and then, as if to dismiss me, he said, I'll give you 1 stroke, and good afternoon. And I was ushered out of his presence, and he died a few months later. God rest his soul. He was a fantastic person and unbelievable man. I was fortunate enough to attend the inaugural Eisenhower Trophy competition at St Andrews, Scotland, which was a 4-man amateur team event. And Bobby Jones was the non-playing American captain, and they even shipped over a golf cart for him to ride in because he was crippled by then. And I had never seen a golf cart before. Anyhow, I was dragged. I was a young kid who liked going to the pubs and chasing after the wenches, and I was dragged kicking and screaming by Herbert Warren Wind, amongst others, to the ceremony in the Freedom Hall in St. Andrews when they gave Bobby Jones the freedom of the city and the keys to the city. And I've never been so moved in my life, because he had told the people that were in charge that he was not to be helped from his wheelchair to the podium. And it took him 8 painful minutes to get there.
Wow.
I'll remember that as long as I live. And then, as he told me in the hotel later, he realized he'd left his notes in the hotel, but he had such a phenomenal mind that he had virtually memorized it anyhow. And he made this incredible emotional speech about his love for the game and the fact that he hated St. Andrews, torn up his card in the Open Championship and behaved like a lunatic, and how he'd come to love it and love the Scots and so on. And it was just unbelievable. And then a gentleman at the back of the hall with a beautiful tenor voice struck up a cappella, "Will Ye Nay Come Back Again?" And I'll tell you something, Chris, there were 1,500 people packed into that place, and there wasn't a dry eye amongst them, including mine. And wow. I absolutely owe a debt of gratitude to, amongst others, Herb Warren Wind, who literally dragged me to this occasion. I wanted to go to the pubs, but I'm very, very pleased that I got to witness this incredible thing.
No doubt. Mr. Wright, you talk about what a fantastic person Mr. Jones was. And of the golfers that you got to know over the years, who are the really good guys that you enjoyed being around when the microphone was off and the golf clubs were put away? Who are the guys that you enjoyed being around?
Chris, the answer to that is really vague, because there are so many good guys. There are the bad guys stand out like a sore thumb, and there are so few of them. But in the old days, we were a band of brothers. The journalists and the golfers were a band of brothers, and we, if a guy behaved scandalously after hours, as it were, a golfer that is, we would never betray him in print. We had a bond of secrecy, if you like, but we would never betray one of our colleagues from the playing arena, because we were so in love with the game. It meant so much to us that you just didn't want to rat on anybody.
So to that point, right? Today it seems, and I think that's true of the media in general. And at some point in time, media came to where it almost seems like it flipped. And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it seems like today everybody likes the dirty laundry, right? It's the negative news that we see, in our faces day after day after day. And I do a football show, Mr. Wright, where we talk, we see so many, football players getting in trouble, and the Ray Rices of the world, and the guys like that, and we hear about it over and over and over again. It's at some point in time, did you notice that the media went from this level of, as you talk about, level of secrecy, and we didn't want to air that dirty laundry to now that's what we love to do. The media loves to do the dirty laundry.
Yeah, Chris, it all happened when the newspapers, who were having a struggle financially, pulled off the golf beat reporters, as they used to be called. In other words, the newspapers couldn't afford to have a full-time golf correspondent. And that was when the cancer crept into the golf writing business. I mean, in my young days, golf was incredibly enriched by its fantastic literature. You know, there were unbelievable golf books, and there was unbelievably good writing day by day in the newspapers. As a matter of fact, my editor at the Financial Times, a gentleman who was knighted for his services to journalism, Sir Gordon Newton, gave me one hell of a going over because I quoted Nicklaus very fully after Jack had won the British Open of 1966 at Muirfield, Scotland, his first ever victory in the event. And Sir Gordon said, "We pay you to describe the scene and express yourself. We don't need to be quoting golfers right, left, and center, even if they are as august a figure as Jack Nicklaus." And boy, that teach me a lesson. I didn't use quotes very often in my column after that. And, I think it all changed. And, of course, the social media has further cheapened everything and made it, as you so rightly say, so negative. It's dirt they're seeking. And, of course, I was on the receiving end of that a bit in my time with CBS when I got heaved out for talking. There were too many lesbians on the LPGA Tour to make it a viable proposition on TV, and the boobs got in the way of a golf swing. And I might tell you, I've had literally hundreds of women who since then have come and rubbed their chest against mine and say, yeah, they do get in the way. And that sounds irreverent, but I don't mean it so. They were women who were very much in sympathy with me for my dismissal. And I love women, and I love women golfers, and I think they are phenomenal. And I believe now that if only they can get some more Americans to fend off the Orientals, the women's game is in the best ever shape it could be.
You talk about getting a going over, Mr. Wright, and they say in professional sports sometimes the trades you didn't make turn out to be actually the best ones. And back in 1973, CBS Sports flew you out from London to cover the LA Open, and the late great Frank Cherkinian, the legendary producer for CBS, who you became very close to, had some words to you about the style with which you broadcast that day, and you actually tried to fly back out that night, which would have changed the course not only of golf history but broadcasting history. Do you mind sharing that story and your relationship with Mr. Cherkinian?
No, I don't mind at all. Frank had not taken very kindly to me when I was brought in to work for CBS in 1972 because I was appointed over his head, and he was not known as the Ayatollah for nothing. And he was extremely ticked off that I had been appointed over his head because he regarded CBS Golf as his fiefdom, as it were. So I was late for rehearsal for reasons that I thought were perfectly adequate, because I'd had a hell of a job getting from London, England to Los Angeles, and I didn't know where Riviera Country Club was from a hole in the ground, and I had a cab driver from the Bel Air Hotel who was, I think, more familiar with Afghanistan than Los Angeles, and he couldn't find Riviera, and I was late for rehearsal. So after really reaming me out in a very public way, he said, "Okay, now you're done, Limey. Take it from here." And I was at the par 3 16th hole. This was on Friday morning of the second round, And Bruce Devlin, the great Australian golfer, made a terrible hash of the par 3 16th at which I was stationed. He flashed it across the green from bunker to bunker, and he had come in with a 2-stroke lead in the event and walked out as just a member of the pack after a double bogey. And I was dumb enough to say, now it's all a new ball game. And Mr. Chikinian said, where the hell did you learn that expression from? You dumb limey. And there were a few more expletives. And I said, well, I learned it from you folks, Frank. He said, you learned it from us folks? You dumb limey, so do you not realize we pay you to be an Englishman and sound like an Englishman and go wah, 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 but with a plum in his mouth that nobody understands him, but they think because you come from Britain, you must know something about it. We said, if I ever understand another word you say, you're fired. Which wasn't quite true, but my goodness, I became suddenly very, very English in my delivery, and probably saved my mediocre career.
That's a great.
So that was it was a very salutary experience, and Frank could be absolutely ruthlessly hard and really ethnically incorrect, as it were, politically speaking. But if you did the job, there was no one more loyal to you. And I remember distinctly being at CBS headquarters, and one of the presidents of the network had decided I was too expensive. They were flying me over from England, and in one year in the middle 70s, I did 22 round trips between our countries, first class. That cost a ton of money, and this president of CBS decided I was too expensive. So called up with Frank to CBS headquarters in Black Rock on 52nd Street in New York, and Frank was called in first by this gentleman, and I heard distinctly from the anteroom where I was waiting to be fired, and Frank was thumping the president's desk saying, if the limey goes, I go. And it struck me as absolutely unbelievable, and I was called in to be told that I wasn't going to be fired. And Frank became my dearest friend, and I mourn his passing every time I think about it, because he was just the greatest producer-director of golf, in my opinion, the world has ever seen. And I worked with a lot of the great ones all around the world, and there was only two I can think of off the top of my head who were anywhere near as good as he. And that was Mac Hemian, who started ABC's Wide World of Sports, and a gentleman in England who worked for the BBC called Alan Mounser. They were both consummate operators, but not quite in the same league as Frank Chikinian. You know something, Chris, when I first rewatched or watched for the first time the last day's broadcast of Jack Nicklaus's sixth Masters win in 1986, I was immediately impressed by how long periods of silence there were. And I could just imagine Frank saying, shut the something up, and let it play, you bloody idiot, or something to that effect. And you know something? That's where Frank was a genius. He would shut you up. Anyhow, on that broadcast, on that particular day, when it was actually happening, and Jack Nicklaus made his historic eagle at my hole, the 15th, I was literally unable to hear Frank Chikinian for the first and only time in my career with him, you know, which was pretty long. And I was totally and utterly bewildered because the crowd noise was so enormous. I'd never heard anything like it. So I said nothing. And that night we always had a cookout after the event had finished, and we were particularly happy because it had been such a great event, probably one of the greatest event I was ever associated with as a broadcaster. And I apologized to Frank, and I said, I'm sorry, but I just couldn't hear a word you say. You said because of the noise of the crowd who were going crazy for Nicklaus. Yeah. And Frank said, you did absolutely right, my boy. And I wish some of your colleagues would do the same every now and again.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean? He said, keep silent. And it was, very interesting, really. Valued silence like nobody else I've ever known or worked with, maybe with the exception of Henry Longhurst, who was my guide and mentor. And he would never say anything more than he had to. And, I remember Henry saying to Frank, who'd put him on camera, and, Henry was a pretty decrepit old man at the time. And he said, Frank, you have failed utterly to realize that announcers should be heard and not seen. And I thought that was hilarious, but Henry was a card. My goodness, he was crazy.
To expand a little bit on your being there in the '86 Masters with Mr. Nicklaus, people can say all they want about Vern Lundquist and him saying yes sir when Mr. Nicklaus's putt on 17 went in, but I remember your whole call of the 15th hole that day. I remember, and it has stuck with me, Mr. Wright. You're saying the old bear is back, and how he and Jackie, when they were surveying the putt, he's really looked at this one, from every conceivable angle. And when Mr. Nicklaus backed away from his, practice putting stroke while he was on the green, now he will wait for absolute quiet. And you were the first person to say, yes, sir, which was about a half an hour before Vern Lundquist used the same phrase. Talk about that.
Yes. And for a while, Vern claimed it to be his. But eventually he saw the light and admitted it was me. Very grudgingly, I might add. But it doesn't really matter, does it?
No. So, that day, and like I said in the intro, and you've talked about a little bit here, the crowd being as loud as it was, and what a special event it was that day. Could you sense, you're at the 15th hole, so I'm assuming you understand the charge that he's having on the back nine leading up to the event, at 15 when you pick up the call. But was the sense of anticipation for you great as you saw him coming up 15? And are you rooting for him sort of at that point?
Well, I've got to tell you that I thought he was going to, Nicklaus was going to fall just short. Because if you remember, he'd bogeyed the par 3 12.
Right.
And I thought that might just scupper him because, you had Seve, Greg Norman, Tom Kite. They were all in there with their chances. And I thought, he might have blown it at the 12th. But when he made the eagle at 15, I became a believer again. And I've got to say, I wanted him really, really badly to do it. Of course, you're not allowed to give that kind of impression, but I'm sure I probably let it escape somehow. But I wanted him to win. I think it was one of the great achievements ever recorded in the game of golf.
You also called one of Mr. Nicklaus's other great triumphs at Augusta in 1975, and a phrase you used that day when Tom Weiskopf made a birdie at 15 while Mr. Nicklaus was walking up to the tee at 16, and I'll never forget, you said, "That is evil music ringing in Nicklaus's ear." That's another great line. Talk about, that day.
That was great because Henry came back, and when Nicklaus held the monstrous putt on 16, I think Henry said, if memory serves me right, Nicklaus has created a little evil music of his own. And I remember Frank saying to his dying day that was the best exchange he'd ever heard between two announcers, and I was very flattered by that. But I never rehearsed anything. Everything was spontaneous with me. I took only the pairing sheet to the tower because I'd done all my homework before I went there. And I think spontaneity is enormously important in our business. And I think my great friend and sparring partner, Gary McCord, became a little less spontaneous after I left him because he always had his laptop up the tower with him, and he would choose from any number of phrases that he put into the computer. And I think, that is a mistake. I think spontaneity brings out the best in you if you've got it in you to have the best. You also got to spend a lot of time in the Eisenhower cabin and playing rounds of golf at Augusta National. I can't imagine life gets any better than that. What was it like spending time just away from the tournament, but being on the grounds and being a part of what was going on at Augusta National? Do you know something, Chris? It was like dying and going to heaven if you were as keen on the game as I was, and I might add. What happened was I drove down from my mountaintop house here in the western North Carolina mountains in Flat Rock on the Monday afternoon and was ushered into the Eisenhower cabin where I was given Eisenhower's bedroom.
Wow.
And that was entirely, the walls were entirely covered by black and white pictures of the various places at which he had served in his incredibly long and distinguished military career, which was absolutely awesome for me. And then at cocktail hour, we went downstairs. Pat Summerall was in the adjoining bedroom. And we went downstairs for cocktails with Mr. Horde Harding, who then ran the show, ran the Masters, and did for several years with great elegance, as a matter of fact. And we had cocktails, and then we walked across to the main dining room and had dinner there. I went back to the cabin, had a nightcap. Then the next morning, we had breakfast in the men's grill upstairs. And then we played the big course, having hit balls. We played the big course at 9:30. And Mr. Hardin and Frank Chikinian, year after year, played Pat and myself, and we beat them like a drum, I might add. But which made it all the more fun for me. But anyhow, we played the big course, and it was magnificent. Everybody got out of the way as they saw Mr. Harding coming, because he liked to play quickly, and I always admire people who do that, since that's the way I was brought up in England. But anyhow, we had lunch in the locker room grill, and then Mr. Harding would say, year after year, that he had work to do in the afternoon, which I suspect was a fib or a lie. I think he went for a nap, but I didn't care, because Frank, Pat, and myself played skins on the par 3 course till it was time to get cleaned up for the cocktail hour, and we'd go through the same evening ring and roll again. And we did that and left on Friday morning, having played golf all of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the week before the Masters. So we saw the golf course exactly as it was going to be. And I remember one year the greens were so impossibly fast, but actually Harding summoned the superintendent and told him to back off. And I shall never forget that I managed to play a decent third shot to the par 5/8 up the hill and round the corner, and I was 15 feet to the right of the flagstick, which was stationed on the front center portion of the green, because most of the pins were towards the front because of the tournament being the following week. And I was about to putt, and I was, I was really perplexed. I had a 15-foot putt, and yet I was aiming 10 feet right of the hole. And my caddy, an African-American club caddy, said, "No, Mr. Wright, you've got to hit it to the top of the hill, in other words, at right angles to the hole, and let it come down the slope, and that's your only hope of staying on the green with this putt." And I did it, and the damn thing went in the hole. And Hord Harding let out a bunch of expletives that were quite graphic.
That's a great story.
And called me a very rude name, I might add.
I bet he did too.
Yeah.
Mr. If CBS asked you to come back and broadcast one more Masters, would you do it?
Oh, I'd love to. I would give my eye teeth to, but I would have to defer to my colleagues, because I don't follow it as closely as they're forced to do. Although, because I broadcast every week with Matt Adams on the Fairways of Life.
We'll talk about that.
I do pay quite a bit of attention, but not like I used to. I used to have everything in the top of my head. But it would be an incredible thing for me just to sit there at my old perch. But of course, David Fairty might be totally ticked off if I displaced it. Maybe the two of us could share the position.
There you go. Now you're talking.
It wouldn't be a bad idea.
You talked about this a moment ago, but you made one comment 20 years ago that cost you the role at CBS. Now, like we were talking about a moment ago, all the negative things that you see athletes do and people just sort of in the media in general do, and get second and third chances to come back and continue to play the sport that they're in. Does it bother you that society that is so willing to forgive athletes that repeatedly, do things and, from a negative thing, whether, it's domestic violence or, child abuse that we see now in the NFL and things of that nature. And they're allowed to have a second chance. That no one reached out to you to give you a second chance?
Well, it's very interesting that you should ask me that, Chris, because I was bitter and twisted for a while, but I had sort of given up on ever being given a second chance when along came Matt Adams, God bless him, and gave me that second chance. And he said to me, having done a very successful interview with me, about an hour long, I think, but they played out a number of times, and he said, Ben, I don't know whether you remember me. And I said, of course I remember you. You did the best interview with me that I've ever had. And he said, I want you to be on my program for the rest of your life. And I said, Matt, do you know how old I am? That could be 3 weeks, buddy. And here we are, 3.5 years later, and I enjoy enormously doing my weekly little chat with Matt, mostly about the past, of course, because I said to him, as I said to you, I don't have much of a future, but I have a hell of a past. And I think that's fairly true.
It is very true. And I'll tell you, to that end, Matt, Matt and his producer Dominic Scarano are two guys that you and I both think very highly of. And to your point, people can hear their show Fairways of Life every weekday morning on the PGA channel on Sirius XM channel 93. And I've had the honor, Mr. Wright, of having Matt as a guest on this show a couple of times, and Dominic does such a great job, being his producer. One of the first time I had Matt join me on the show, I asked him about his relationship with you and how that got started, because, as I said to him, I've missed you being a part of, the broadcasting, particularly the majors. And what he said to me was that he had a personal conviction towards you, and that conviction is that a man's life should be judged by the balance and weight of what he's done, not by a flashpoint, either good or bad. He said he wrote a letter to you saying, you've been banished long enough and people want to hear from you, and he would love to give you that forum to be heard. You talked about it a moment ago, but would you be interested, and kind of talking about how, that relationship is formed, and let people know, because I want them to know how they can hear you on a regular basis.
Well, something, I can't tell you how much I value the fact that I have a weekly appointment. It really has brought a lot of purpose back into my life. I'm 82 going on 83 now. But Henry Longhurst used to say to me, if you keep your marbles as you get older, no one can argue with you because you're so old they weren't around to argue that anything was true or untrue. So you can get away with anything you like. Which I think that's a bit going a bit far, but the point is, I can't tell you how much it means to me what Matt and Dominic do to make life fantastically exciting for me once a week. And that may seem over the top, but if you've been away for as long as I was, it means an awful lot. I've done countless shows around the country, but nothing except John Boy and Billy out of Charlotte. I do them on a regular basis on the big golf events. I'm the Big Show golf correspondent, according to John Boy. God bless him. So anyhow, but it's not the same as a weekly gig with Matt and Dominic.
Yeah, They do such a great job, and like I say, they've been great to me, and they actually got us hooked up. So I'm very thankful for Dominic and for Matt for allowing me the opportunity and the honor to be able to talk with you. Before we let you go, Mr. Wright, I know, like you say, you live up in the mountains in North Carolina. You're still doing some wonderful things for some great charities. Talk about the events that you get to host and the other things you're doing now.
Well, I concentrate quite a lot on charity now, and I have tournaments in my name. One in South Carolina for Meals on Wheels. We've netted, in 19 years of a one-day event, we've netted close to $7 million.
Wow.
And I do another one, the Ben Wright Invitational at Crystal Mountain, Michigan, near Traverse City, and that is for junior golf. And, it gives me great satisfaction. Since I've taken a very great deal out of the game, it makes it good for me. It makes me feel better that I'm giving a little bit back in my dotage, as it were.
Well, Mr. Wright, it has been an incredible privilege to get to spend some time with you this morning. And I know how much you enjoy being on Matt's show and doing the other things that you just mentioned. I would certainly love for you to come back and be a part of this show from time to time, because you know so much about the game, and you are such an incredible person and resource to talk about the legends of the game. And there's so many more things about the time that you got to spend with Mr. Hogan and Mr. Snead and all the great legends from back in the 50s, 60s, 70s that I'd love to get into with you. I hope you'll come back and do it again.
I'd love to, Chris. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I run off at the mouth rather easily, but I hope your listeners will appreciate I've still got a huge affection for the game, despite the fact my own game is absolutely appalling.
I bet that's not true. I bet you're still really good at it.
No, alas, I had my last success in 2013 when my partner and I won the Burning Tree Club's Invitational in Washington, D.C. And
wow.
And I've competed very little since, because I know when enough is enough.
Well, good for you for going out on top and winning an event in your 80s. That's quite an accomplishment. Good for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, thank you for being here. I hope to get the opportunity and the honor of having you again sometime. In the meantime, happy holidays to you and your family, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.
I would love it, Chris. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you for being so indulgent to me.
Oh. It's an absolute honor for me to have had you as part of the show. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Good day.
Bye-bye.
Wow. You want to talk about a thrill and an honor of a lifetime. It's to spend the greater part of almost an hour with Mr. Ben Wright, and I hope I do get the privilege of having him back on the show again real soon. That would absolutely be fantastic. All right, but before we close up shop, folks, I want to let you know about the great book. You've heard me talking about it over the last several weeks, A Golden 18, written by Roger Schiffman, and the photography by one of our friends and one of the great photographers anywhere on the planet, Jim Mandeville. Jim, I'm sure you know, is the director of photography now at the Nicklaus Company. He's been there for many, many years. The book showcases some of Mr. Nicklaus's greatest golf course designs. The stories about the courses are wonderful, and his photography is simply outstanding. In fact, it's so good, you're going to want a second copy of that book so you can take some of the pictures out and get them framed. So it's going to make a great gift for this holiday season for the golfer in your life, particularly guys like me who are also big fans of Mr. Nicklaus. To get your copy, go to nicklaus.com and hover over Products and Partners, the tab you're going to see it on the homepage, and then click on Books and Videos. If you love golf and stunning photography, you're going to love this book. All right, everybody, it's time to put a bow on this one. My sincere thanks once again to Mr. Wright for being such a great guest with me this morning, and we thank you for tuning in. You know we appreciate you the very most. Please check out our sister show, Thursday Night Tailgate, with me and my co-host, Bob Lazari, our announcer, Joe LaGenusa. That show airs every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find it live on Blog Talk Radio. It's rebroadcast Friday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Boost Radio and on the Armed Forces Radio Network. We're joined every week by legends from around the NFL and CFL. Please check out both shows on Facebook. Give us a like. That's important to us, too. You can find us online at nextonthetee.net and ThursdayNightTailgate.com. You can stream or download any of our archive episodes for free and keep up to date with who our future guests are on those sites. I thank you again for making the choice to listen to this show. I can't thank you enough for being a part of it. Until next week, my friends, hit 'em straight.